Welcome. Welcome to this special Sacred Medicine series. I am your host, Dr. DaeEss Wondrea. I am a sonic alchemist, integrative physician, and psychedelic assisted therapy facilitator. We have several special calls that we're doing, but today I have the good pleasure of hosting Dr. Michael Steward, who I met on a retreat and became fascinated in his level of awareness of cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. So I'm going to just read Michael's bio so that you have a sense of who he is, and then I'm going to let him take it away. We will have a presentation. There'll be slides for all of the nerds who are visual learners like me, and then Mike will also have time for Q&A. So here's the bio. As soon as I let more people in from the waiting room, I should have assigned someone else that role, as it keeps pulling me out of my flow. All right. Dr. Michael Steward has been a licensed physician for over 30 years and is board certified in family medical practice, a specialist in HIV treatment, palliative care, cannabinoid medicine, and is a member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. He previously owned and operated the largest HIV care practice in a 5-state region and has held a medical director position in the areas of hospice and home health care. Dr. Steward has been on multiple pharmaceutical advisory boards, and as you may have heard, he's also got a company that's working on some pretty interesting stuff. So, Michael, thank you again for joining us. It's lovely to connect again. I will let you take it away.
Right. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Mike, if you want to be formal. Otherwise, Mike works real well. And I think we'll just jump into things here. Chris is going to share a screen here. And this is a series that we put on for a group that works with Dr. Daniel Pompa, who focuses on detoxification for folks who have chronic medical problems. And so we put together formulations to help support what he does. Briefly, is what we do is we do hemp-derived formulations. I actually come from a family of business folks, not medical people. And for some reason, I was expected to go down that path, but I got diverted and went into fire rescue for 7 years. And that really captured my attention and wound up being board certified in family practice. Although I'm not board certified anymore, I was. And I did own and operate the largest family practice providers or office that was family practice providers of HIV care in a 5-state region. And I did that, was doing HIV care before there was a standard of care. And so I actually became experienced bringing novel therapies into clinical practice. And that's where I became, or at least was exposed to cannabis, because medicinal marijuana and HIV right around maybe 1992, that became kind of an issue, and people were asking for medical recommendations for medicinal marijuana. At that time, I couldn't do it because I was allowing my attorney to practice medicine for me. But I did notice my HIV clients were actually doing as well, if not better, than my other folks were when they were using medicinal marijuana. And I really discovered why, a little more than a decade ago, when I did a deep dive into the endocannabinoid system, which is the master regulator in the human body. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But at any rate, I became experienced in cannabis medicine, studied those, and we were producing some products using hemp-based therapies, because hemp is, in essence, marijuana without much THC. And we can go into the differences between hemp and marijuana if you want to here in the future. But when COVID hit, because of my experience with HIV care, HIV is another RNA virus, I was asked to go be a COVID doc. And so I went to do my continuing medical education and went into the center. And I actually found, wait a minute, we could attenuate every single inflammatory marker that was being followed in acute COVID with cannabis and our products. And so in essence, we found a group of people in 21, called themselves long haulers. None of us knew what that was. We worked with them for about 10 weeks. I would give a 10-minute presentation and then do questions and answers. We were trying to figure out what was going on. We did put together a formulation to help with symptoms that was very successful. Chris Followed up with folks, I think in December of 21, and a couple of people actually started crying on the phone with him when they found out, that their symptoms had gone away. At any rate, we've done clinical trials now where we show how phytocannabinoids can attenuate the symptoms of long COVID. We've put together a specific formulation to do that. It's with full cannabis here. I'm not going to go into a whole lot about what we did now because we're going to skip over most of this, but this is about what cannabis can do. And the reason why it can do all of these different things is that we have a system called the endocannabinoid system in the human body, and it is the master regulator of the human body. When you look on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a human body, and then you see this green box or at any rate icon over there, and it regulates all of those other symptoms or systems. We have our autonomic nervous system, which has two parts to it, our sympathetic or the fight or flight system that happens whenever we're under a stress. And then we have our parasympathetic system, and that's our rest and digest system. Most of the time, we want to spend our time in our rest and digest system. And then if any stress comes along, we want to respond to that stress. And that's when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Think about the endocannabinoid system as the system that will bring us back from any time any stress has affected us. It's designed to bring us back to our natural state of being, which is rest, digest, and one of wellness. I think we can go to the next slide here, Chris. So the endocannabinoid system is a three-part system in our body, and it's called the cannabinoid system or endocannabinoid system, endo meaning our own, and cannabinoid because it responds to the cannabis plant. And so the system has ligands. They're either endocannabinoids, meaning cannabinoids that have been produced by the human body, or they're phytocannabinoids coming from a plant, or synthetic cannabinoids, meaning we made them. Those interact with receptors in the human body, and in the middle, there are a whole bunch of different receptors, but the cannabinoid receptors in the human body are the most common, so it's all over our body. And then we have enzymes that break down the ligands that interact with the receptors. Briefly, the cannabis plant's going to also have three parts to it. It's going to have cannabinoids. Those are a pretty stable part of the plant when we're talking about using them as medicines. Terpenes, which the plant uses for defense, are very medicinal. The cannabinoids will interact with this endocannabinoid system. The terpenes interact with all sorts of different systems in our body. They allow us to use this plant for focused medicinal benefits. And then we have flavonoids in there. We know they're medicinal. We don't have as much information about them as the cannabinoids and terpenes. So I don't direct my formulations based on the flavonoids. But on the terpenes, I do, because they can be anti-cancer. They can help with brain function. They can relieve anxiety. They can help with depression. They can help wake you up, and they can help make you go to sleep. In these terpenes, they are the part of the plant that gives the plant aroma. The plant uses this for defense. And what that means is they're very volatile molecules. They leave the plant so that they can do their job. And that also means that they leave any kind of formulation when you're working with it if you're not very careful with it. Terpenes, for example, I'll talk about pinene briefly. It's a wonderful antidepressant and has some anti-inflammatory qualities to it as well. If you're out in nature and you're walking through a pine forest and you're feeling great, is it because you're out in nature and walking through a pine forest and feeling great, or could it be partially because of the pinene that's in the air? And it probably is both. We have infused, or they in studies have infused both pinene and limonene, another terpene, into depression wards. And they've actually objectively shown people's depressions improve. Limonene is another terpene I'll talk just briefly about. It helps a lot with neuronal inflammation. It's another good antidepressant. It's less activating than pinene is. And probably my favorite terpene is one called beta-caryophyllene. It's intimately involved with our sense of well-being. And beta-caryophyllene can also be involved with our appetite. It's a great anti-inflammatory. I believe it's part of the reason why our studies show that we increase quality of life as well as whatever targeted thing we're going after. I think we're done here. So what happens if your endocannabinoid system is impaired? We'll talk just very briefly about this because this is where chronic disease comes in. Our endocannabinoid system is designed to be self-regulating, and usually it is. But the issue that we have these days is it wasn't designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you guys, wake up and you have a cell phone near you, or you walk around with one in your pocket or your purse, you're probably operating your endocannabinoid system more often than you want to, because we've just put more stress in our environment than I think we were designed to. We don't give our endocannabinoid system the rest that it needs, generally, with good sleep and meditation, voluntary exercise, those things that help the endocannabinoid system. Another area that we're unfortunately in Western, society deficient in is our diet. The endocannabinoid system is supported by a proper diet, including omega-3 to 6 fatty acid ratios that are good for you. Toxicities in our foods and environment also impact the endocannabinoid system. So when it's dysregulated, what we've actually hypothesized, wrote a paper about, and had it published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, is that the endocannabinoid system becomes a problem, or it's stressed and it's not working well, and anxiety, depression, fatigue, sleep disturbances, cognitive dysfunction are symptoms of endocannabinoid system dysfunction. And if we support the endocannabinoid system, these seemingly unrelated symptoms will resolve. And in fact, that's sort of what we found. Exactly what we found. I think we can go on from this slide. I will talk just briefly about that thermostat that was there, though. The way that I describe the endocannabinoid system is kind of like a smart house thermostat. For example, if you're living with somebody who's having hot flashes and wants the bedroom at 62 degrees, and somebody else wants the den at 72 degrees, you can have great air conditioners and heaters. But if your house thermostat doesn't know to operate the heater in the den and the air conditioner in the bedroom, you're not going to get your optimal results. And the endocannabinoid system is that smart thermostat for us. It operates our independent organ systems. We really won't go through this. These are our products that we have out for folks. If you want to know about that, I'll answer it in the question and answer. But this is really kind of the end of where we need to have the slides. So we can go to question and answer. So it's a very different approach to cannabis, and we can talk in a much more general way about it. We've just talked about why cannabis works in the body, and that is the endocannabinoid system. And I do focus on the medicinal side of cannabis. Now, I am experienced in other areas of cannabis. I do have some experience in the psychedelics. It's an area that I would say my experience is primarily for my own health benefits, although I've done it enough that I've studied it too. I think I've had between 50 and 75 ayahuasca journeys, and it's been extremely helpful for me. Andrea, tell me where we want to go.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Chris, for running slides. Thank you, Michael, for the overview. It's really helpful. I think I'm going to be selfish and start with me because the first time that you and I met and you gave me the rundown, I had glass eyes. So I want you to start very basic and help us understand. You mentioned the terpenes and how very specific terpenes have very specific effects, like the cognitive effects and mood and so on. What I often hear people talking about when they're talking about cannabis is they're also talking about the strain. So I'm wondering, is it the strain that determines that each strain has its own combination of terpenes?
Each strain of cannabis is going to have its own individual distribution of cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids. And so a strain of cannabis is, what we call them, I call the chemical, or we call the chemical composition of that, the chemovar. So if you hear me talk about chemovars, those are different strains of the cannabis plant based on its chemical composition. And by the way, Chris, if you need to take off, I know I've hijacked you this morning. You can take off if you need to, and we're okay. And if you want to stay, that's great too. Sorry about that. Just
No, it's all
housekeeping.
good. Yeah, thank you, Chris. So, okay, so strains equals chemovars, and each strain is going to have its mix of flavonoids, cannabinoids, and terpenes. And it's the
Right.
specific terpenes that have specific effects. So wait, I want to go one level deeper.
Terpenes, yeah, the specific terpenes do, but it's not just the terpenes. The individual cannabinoids have their own individual effects, and the individual terpenes do, and then the flavonoids do as well. And then in combination, we have the synergies among the 400 different components that are in this plant. And Mother Nature's the one that, chose the distribution of the chemicals in this plant. And we have co-evolved with the cannabis plant. This is just some basic background information. You can stop me if I'm going into too much detail, but over thousands of years, really hundreds of thousands of years, but to make the archaeologists happy, over, tens of thousands of years, we have co-evolved with this plant and we have bred out of it anything that was toxic. So we are dealing with a non-toxic plant. And it's one that we've used to house us. It's one we've used to feed us. It's part of how we became mobile, because when we discovered that we could use horses, we needed a food source. And cannabis seeds, hemp seeds, were great food source. And pretty quickly you had a green leafy vegetable. There's a different approach too with medicines, and we're not talking about that particularly here, but when we start with botanical medicines and we're using something that, for example, like the cannabis plant is the green leafy vegetable, and it's one that we have co-evolved with, we've, cultivated. And so the body, as long as we keep it whole, we're not isolating out the different components of them and then concentrating them and Frankensteining them back together. We have the wisdom of Mother Nature. Your body will recognize what you're using as a green leafy vegetable that you're using as a medicine. When we isolate out the components, by definition, we now have poisons, and we need to find the lethal dose of before we can use them. Even water has a lethal dose. And so the botanical area in the botanical approach is going to be very different than your single molecule pharmaceutical approaches.
Okay.
All right. Sorry
So
for the
now,
tangent.
no, it's good. It's interesting. So now let's go to THC versus CBD. And, most people, unless you live in a state like in the United States or other countries where there's medical cannabis, most people are buying sort of gummies or tinctures. And I don't know how precise the labels are, but what I understand, at least from my rudimentary research, is that in addition to the terpenes and the cannabinoids, there's a difference between how it impacts our system, whether there's THC or not. So give us that, and then I open it up to anyone in the community who wants to type in a question or raise a hand.
Mm-hmm. So very basically, cannabis sativa L is the name of this plant, and sativa means cultivated. If it has more than 0.3% THC by volume, we call that plant marijuana. And if it has less than 0.3% THC by volume, we call that plant hemp. So the difference between hemp and marijuana is a legal definition, and it is related to how much of the single cannabinoid THC is in the plant. And so I'm going to miss your question for just a second because I was off on a little bit of a tangent there. The two most talked about cannabinoids are going to be THC and CBD. And there certainly is an industry out there that would like you to believe that THC is the evil drug and that CBD is the medicine. And it's just not the whole truth. So THC does cause intoxication or euphoria. It's more euphoria in folks because of the way it interacts with the body. but it is one of the over 400 components in this plant. And when you keep it in the plant, in the concentrations in which Mother Nature made it, then it is quite medicinal and quite necessary for the optimum function of the plant. So the company that I have right now is called Entourage, and that's a combination of the endocannabinoid system and the entourage effect of the cannabis plant. And that entourage effect of the cannabis plant, where the different components, all the different cannabinoids, all the different terpenes are working together synergistically, make this a very effective medicine. That's why the body recognizes this as a medicine, because when we use the full chemovar, full plant medicines rather than isolates, we're utilizing the wisdom of Mother Nature. If I'm using over 400 components in a formulation called cannabis, people can say I'm creating chemical chaos in the body. There are some terpenes that help wake you up alongside some that help you go to sleep, and some that make you hungry alongside some that are going to make you feel satiated. And so I'm just creating chemical chaos. And I would tell you that if I had picked those 400 different components myself, you're right. But when you use the wisdom of Mother Nature knows what she's doing. And that's why when you're looking for cannabis products and you want them to respond as medicines or to respond in your body, you really want to get the full cannabis product that you can. So you want the terpenes, the flavonoids, you want the cannabinoids, what I do is take out organic material. You have to be careful how you process the plant, because most of the stuff that you will buy is made through biomass, and these terpenes are very fragile. So if using biomass is kind of like buying products where you want orange juice, and so you cut down the orange tree, you throw it in a wood chipper, and you extract your orange juice out of it. When you're using, just the flower, we peel the orange, we extract the orange juice. Doesn't mean you can't get medicine out of the other way. It just means it's going to be a little different. And the terpenes, we maintain the integrity and the concentration through our production. So be careful on cannabis products on how they're produced. If you're using gummies, for example, you're not going to have terpenes to any measurable degree. If you do, they're most likely added in after the fact. And when people add them in after the fact, they use cannabis, or they don't use cannabis terpenes, they use other botanical terpenes, and we don't have the same medicinal effects. So the production of putting cannabis into a gummy bear takes away a lot of the medicine. You will still maintain the cannabinoids, so the CBD and the THC, but you will not have the full flower medicine when you're talking about gummy bears or anything like that. You have to go to a tincture that is appropriately made. Terpenes will be destroyed by stomach acid, so they either need to be inhaled or you want to put them under your tongue. So sublingual preparations are probably the way to go for true medicinal preparations. The edibles, again, they will have the cannabinoids in there, but you're not going to take the full effect of using this as a plant medicine. Again, the one part of the plant where people will have a problem with it is THC in general. And it's because of the mood altering effects of THC. You hear in mainstream media that CBD is not psychoactive, and yet it helps attenuate anxiety, and we have studies to prove it. So I'm not sure how it cannot be psychoactive and attenuate anxiety, but that's mainstream media's call. THC does have a potential for misuse. There is a cannabis use disorder, although I think most of the diagnoses of cannabis use disorder are actually an endocannabinoid system deficiency. And if we treat that, the desire for high THC goes away when we use the appropriate chemovar or strain of the plant. Over the last 100 years, and do your own research, but there's something called Rockefeller medicine, and that's really the reason why cannabis was taken away from the physician's toolbox. It was not for medicinal or for any safety reasons in it. It was for political and economic reasons. And when that happened, the majority of people who still sought to use cannabis were wanting to use it to alter their consciousness. And so over time, we selected for higher and higher THC concentration in the chemovars or strains. That's naturally selected, but it is not normal for the plant. And as we let it go back, you will find more and more chemovars that are going to be richer and richer in cannabidiol. I think that's probably much more the way the plant kind of was. If you have a cannabidiol to THC ratio, so a CBD to THC ratio of 4 or more, that plant is not going to create euphoria or intoxication in most people. So it's really not the amount of THC you take, it is the amount of THC to CBD in addition to the amount of THC that you take, because cannabidiol or CBD is called a negative allosteric modulator of the CB1 receptor. And that's a fancy way of saying that when THC tickles this receptor and makes it a little goofy, CBD comes along and says, no, not so goofy. And so isn't it interesting how the plant put the two molecules in the same plant together? Both of them do work synergistically for their anti-inflammatory effects. I'll stop talking and let you ask questions.
Yeah, let's
Cannabis
do it.
is a psychedelic as well.
Right, right. We can get into that perhaps, but I'm going to first take our first question. Noemi put into the chat. I recently started educating myself on cannabis, but never used it. I looked into Daniel McQueen's website a bit, and he markets individual extracts for very specific purposes and objectives. So considering what you say, Michael, about whole plants, what do you know or say about Daniel's approach?
Boy, I was unaware that he had products. I know who he is, and I'm aware of his work, and I have read his first edition of his book. And he is somebody that I do believe I should be working with in some way, shape, or form. So I want to be supportive of his work. I think he's probably doing something similar to what we do, except on more of an artesian level. I have a belief that this molecule beta caryophyllene is out there because it helps attenuate some of the discord created by, say, just things not being as they appear to be. Our mainstream media has been told to scare us, and it's working. It creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, and I think beta caryophyllene is a molecule that will help with that. Why did I say that? I just got off on a tangent. I'm sorry. You can bring me back.
Yeah, we were just talking about Daniel McQueen and that he's probably on to something.
Yeah, he does good work. And your question was, about his approach. I think that probably our philosophies are aligned with one another, and I'm just going down the pathway to bring this particular molecule to more people. And that means I have to do a pivot to the FDA botanical pathway and make what I make now actual drugs, medications. And so that's the difference. I think I could probably support what he does with some of the manufacturing that we do, and that he would be delighted to find our extraction processes. But thank you. I will reach out to him at some point.
Okay. So Marcella and John, I see that you put your hand down, but if you want to come back, let me know. In the meantime, Bhavna wrote, can you speak a bit on K2/spice, synthetic cannabinoid?
Well, what I can tell you is when you get into the synthetics, you throw safety out the window. So Mother Nature is no longer involved. You are talking about, isolates or things, that they're not just isolates, because in general with the synthetics, when I've ever looked at the the certificate of analysis, there are some spikes in there. We don't know what they are. And so when you're using synthetic cannabinoids, I would want to actually see the certificate of analysis, and I want to see the graph of what is in there because I don't think they're safe.
Got it. Next question, Marcella and John, or maybe it's Marcella. Thank you for the great presentation. They say, I do believe in the full spectrum products. Do you have any products specifically for treating cancer? They looked at your website but didn't find any. So with Entourage, your company, are there, and I don't know if you mean by treating cancer by getting rid of cancer or treating symptoms that one has, but I'll let Michael answer.
Well, the way that I would answer it for treating cancer, the formulations that we make and about our website, because of the FDA, we can't make any claims on our website. And to get any true information, you have to get behind the curtain into the clinician area of the website. And I apologize about that. That's part of the reason why we're having to make this shift down the FDA pathway. Tell me the question one more time.
So if we could peek behind the curtain into the clinician side of the website, what products of yours do specifically address cancer?
Well, and what I would tell you is that we do what any full cannabis flower extract will do, and we will do it as well as anybody else that I know of, period, and probably better than most. The reason being is that our extraction, we use ambient temperatures and ambient pressures in our extraction process, and we only use flower. So we maintain the integrity and the concentration of our terpenes better than other people do. All of our products carry a full certificate of analysis with the cannabinoid and terpene distributions on them, including their safety analysis. So anybody who is experienced in cannabinoid medicines will be able to take a look at our distribution from our different products, and they will be able to predict what our products will do. So depending upon what you are doing with cancer, for example, if you are saying, I want to help with my chemotherapy as I'm going through cancer, and I have an oncologist who's willing to work with me, and that oncologist knows that, my favorite molecule, beta-caryophyllene, when combined with the chemotherapeutic agent paclitaxel or Paxil, can increase the intercellular concentration of paclitaxel tenfold. And so I can make my chemotherapy more effective if I combine it with a formulation that's rich in beta-caryophyllene. And I can also help attenuate any of the side effects of the neuropathy that can happen. And so I'm going to look for the formulation that's rich in beta-caryophyllene and a couple of other things. And our formulations will tell you that. And so while I don't have any formulation in particular where we have taken it through a study to show that it helps with cancer, if you know that hemp or cannabis products will be helpful, I produce an excellent quality hemp product where you know exactly what's in that bottle, because I have a tail. Pick up the bottle here. This is what the tail looks like on my bottle. This has to tell you what's in here, because a practitioner who knows cannabis medicine will know how to utilize these different formulations, and they can use them in combinations. And my formulations are in general 3 or 4 different chemovars or strains blended together. And so, you've got a good distribution of things to look for. You just have to know what you want to do. Now, overall, we do know that cannabinoids can slow down cancer on many different levels, and it depends on what area, what cancer. But absolutely, cannabis can be combined with Western therapies. In some cases, it can be used instead of, although I'm reluctant to go down that path unless you're really working with somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful to be able to work with you on a dear friend that was facing pancreatic cancer. And I know that when she got your tinctures, it dramatically helped with the pain, but also putting her into a state where she could really wrestle with potential surgery or potential demise. So I was so impressed with that. All right, but I want to get back to the chat here. Someone else, a dear friend in the United States, says, I am loving this talk. What about the use of insecticides on the plants or in the fertilizers?
Well, that is an issue. This plant is an amazing plant because it, can heal us and house us and clean us and help detoxify our soils. And we grow, cannabis plants at rocky flats because we want to mitigate all the toxins that we have there. And so it's wonderful. Don't use the same plant that you've cleaned up your toxic waste dump as your medicine because this is a phytoremediator. It will concentrate the toxins and get them out of the soil. And so we don't use plants that come into contact with pesticides, and our stuff is organically grown. And we do one step better. We test and we make sure that we do not have any residual solvents. By the way, we use a non-toxic solvent. And don't skip the safety test on any of your cannabis products, by the way, folks. I had a test come back on one of our formulations and it came back positive for isopropyl alcohol. We don't use isopropyl alcohol in our process. So how could that happen, right? Well, I could tell you our products are safe. There's no way isopropyl alcohol could be in my products because I don't use it. You got to test your products. We had a very well-meaning person that didn't know how to clean a machine. And so we had a product that we did not sell to the consumers. We sold it to someone else who sold it to consumers, by the way. So just understand, you want to see that certificate of analysis and have it be clean.
All right. Well, another question. Can you speak to the use of cannabis for treating addiction? The state in which this person practices medicine has approved the use of medical marijuana with medications to treat opioid use disorder, but they haven't been able to find great concrete evidence to back this up. So, yeah, speak on the use of cannabis for people suffering with addiction.
That was our very first formulation, and we were working with an addiction center in California and ready to do a study in COVID hit. So we actually have a formulation, and if you talk to Ethan Russo, I was at a conference where Dr. Ethan Russo was having a sidebar with some other people, and I overheard him say something about being able to cure addiction with, again, my favorite molecule, beta-caryophyllene. And every single hair in the back of my neck stood straight up. And my attention was going to go no other place but to listen to the rest of what that man said. And so that was the formulation that we were bringing through an addiction center. We call it Formula RE for Recovery Elevator because that's a podcast that helps you work, change your relationship with alcohol. There's plenty of evidence out there. If you want to start to do internet searches, search about beta-caryophyllene and drug-seeking behavior, and you're going to come up with multiple animal models, and it's across the board. So the short answer is yes, absolutely we help with addiction. We also help with pain control, and we're working with a physiatrist, and we have two products that he can use. One is for folks who want to stop using whatever substance it is, and we can help attenuate the cravings. We actually brought that formulation through an addiction center in Virginia, and this was just looking for a signal. So this was not an IRB approved study. It was where they had a questionnaire for their folks that were involved in treatment. And we found over 60 days, we had a 6% increase in quality of life measurement with a reduction in cravings. And that's the type of stuff that we can do. Now, if people need to stay on opioid narcotics because they have pain, we also have OER, which stands for opioid enhancement and reduction. And that's where our physiatrist has been able to get people's narcotic use down by about a third. And for folks that are on more than 200 morphine milligram equivalents a day and need to be there because they can't function without it and they tend to kill themselves if you take them off it, but they don't tend to live very long if you keep them on it, we can help with that. And so there are absolutely ways that you can help use these products with addiction, and there are ways that you can help if you have people that need to stay on opioids. We can help reduce the load on there too. How do you go about getting that kind of information? You got to be a little crafty in your internet searches to find the supporting information. And you can't find the study that we've done because we haven't published that one yet.
But it sounds like maybe we could connect you to, since this is an actual medical doctor who posed that question, perhaps we can connect.
Oh, absolutely. If you are a healthcare practitioner, I am allowed to talk to you. Otherwise, the FDA says I can't talk to clients because I'm involved in production. So I'm not allowed to recommend, advise, or prescribe, but I can educate all day long. And if you're a healthcare practitioner and you want to know more, let me know.
Great. I'll connect you then. So the next question that's come up is, do you have connections to trauma therapists that use your products with their clients?
I do not yet, as far as, looking at post-traumatic stress. And by the way, I don't think that's a disorder. When people say PTSD, I think in the future they'll just call it post-traumatic stress, because it's not a disorder when we predictably put somebody in an environment and have an outcome. That you're not disordered. You're hurt, maybe, but you're not disordered. We'd love to work with them.
Okay, next question. We know that cannabis use can trigger psychotic symptoms for some individuals. Are there any data on the underlying chemical mechanisms for that psychotic side?
The chemical mechanisms, aside from the interaction with the CD1 receptor, I don't know that there are. I mean, there are all sorts of pathways that we're involved with there that are similar to the psychedelics. And, we are using a psychotic, so it can cause psychosis. I mean, I know when people say, hey, marijuana can cause psychosis, it's kind of like saying Valium can relieve stress. It's like, well, it's part of what it does. And that can be helpful or it can be harmful. And does, the use of cannabis cause psychosis, meaning things like schizophrenia? And the answer is there's a correlation there. I don't believe it's a causation. There's a little bit of debate out there. But when we look at the number of people who, develop schizophrenia, it's pretty stable. And we get cannabis use that goes up and goes down. And the level of psychosis as far as things like schizophrenia stays stable. So if the question is about, that aspect of things, I do think there's a correlation, and that I think that people who are predisposed find that cannabis-related products help them, and that they are drawn intuitively to the correct plant, just maybe not the right chemovar. Like folks who have a cannabis use disorder, and they've been diagnosed with that, but in fact, their endocannabinoid system just needs a little bit of help. And instead of using something that's pretty balanced, in the cannabinoids, they pick something that's high in THC, and then they think they have a use disorder. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent. You can guide me back.
Okay. Well, we have a couple more questions and we have 15 minutes left. So one, thank you, Bhavna, for all the questions and comments. Based on my understanding, cannabis can trigger earlier onset of schizophrenia in those already predisposed. So it sounds like you kind of already sort of mentioned something along those lines.
Yeah, it's not conclusive. That is probably the the argument people could make is there is a possibility that if you are predisposed and you're using cannabis, that you would experience that sooner rather than later. Now, we're probably only talking about high THC chemovars, probably not any of the balanced chemovars.
Got
But
it.
do the research. If you can find a conclusive answer, give it to me.
All right. Well, that came from the person I'm going to connect you with anyway, so you guys can debate that out.
Yeah,
So the next topic we want to get into is how can we safely use cannabis in psychedelic assisted therapy models? So right now, in some places it's legal for people to do ketamine in the United States. Of course, psilocybin truffles in the Netherlands, where I facilitate. People are like where you and I met, they're going and doing retreats with ayahuasca, but specifically in the psychedelic assisted therapy model, where people are generally having sessions with a coach or therapist to prepare, then they have journeys, and then they're integrating afterward. How would you see cannabis being used safely in that model?
I think that's like Daniel McQueen's work. And that he is the person that I would probably go to and should go to, because now it's come up again. How many more times do I need to say, call him and find out if I should talk to him? I think that that's what he does. And so I would refer you to him being more of the expert there. Using cannabis as a psychedelic isn't the area that I've focused on, and there are some tricks to doing it, as I understand. I think CBN, as in Nancy, is one of the molecules that can help there. And CBN is kind of like, it's what happens to THC when it gets old. I use it in a sleep product that we make because when it gets old, I'm allowed to use a higher concentration of it. And it's sedating, but it doesn't create as much. Interesting, it doesn't create as much euphoria, but might be a more significant psychedelic effect. But this is hypothetical stuff I'm talking to you about right now. I should stop because it's a professional setting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've got another comment here. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. What are your thoughts? So sticking with psychedelic therapy or even psycholytic therapy, do you have formulations specific for this purpose? And this person says, I've been using indica strains for insomnia, anxiety, etc., and sativa for introspection and processing material in therapy. So what do you have to say about formulations that might help someone in therapy?
Right. So when you're talking about a sativa or an indica, you're really talking about the terpene distribution there. And generally, the sativas are higher in the terpenes like pinene, that are more activating, and the indicas are going to be higher in things like myrcene and linalool. They're the more sedating kind of terpenes. But really, I think you're going to see the nomenclature of indica and sativa disappear in the future, and you're really just going to look at the terpene distributions. And that's where folks who study cannabinoid medicine will be able to look at those terpenes. It's interesting. We'll call it cannabinoid medicine, but it should really be terpene medicine. In a very simplistic way, and this is way simplified, I look at the cannabinoids in the formulations as really being what's going to balance our master regulator in the body. It's going to make sure that all the parts are working well and talking to each other. And then the terpenes are for my specific formulations. They're going to target whatever the symptom is that's not the overall general one. In many ways, look at cannabis medicines first as a nutrient and then as a medicine. So in low doses, they should all give your endocannabinoid system what it needs to be supported. And by the way, if you're phytocannabinoid naive and you come across phytocannabinoids, so you haven't, been using marijuana and you use marijuana, your endocannabinoid system will upregulate the number of naturally occurring receptors it has. So we, in essence, sensitize the endocannabinoid system over about 72 hours. And for somebody, if you come across folks who have fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, and migraine headaches, and they have not used a cannabis product, and you get them on a full flower medicine, and it's an endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, just a small amount, 2 to 5 milligrams, balances their system in over 3 days. Their fibromyalgia, their irritable bowel, and their migraines disappear, and they don't come back. And those people will love you forever.
Well, I know that people struggling with trauma or anxiety would also love us if we could figure out the right ratios of what to provide.
Formula AX is the formulation that we put out there for those. If anybody here wants to try any of our products, I mean, I'll give you a code if you want to use it. Our products on our website are priced high because we want to direct people to practitioners. And if people go through practitioners, we give them 50% off the website price. And if anybody here wants to use any of our products, if you use the code Dr. Mike, just DRMIKE 75, we'll give you a 75% discount. And that's what we do to get people, to use their practitioners. But
those are only available for people in America?
In the United States right now, we can't guarantee shipping outside the United States because of the hemp issue, the cannabis issue.
Okay, so Formula AX could be useful.
Formula AX. Yeah.
Got it.
And I am happy to tell folks, what to look for with any of the individual things. If you're looking for anxiety, I can tell you the terpenes and cannabinoids to look for. And this is where, we've got to make these kind of medicines in the United States. Otherwise, they're not picked up. We have a formulation. It treats long COVID. And, the head of rehabilitation at Mount Sinai had long COVID and took our product. And she tells us it cured her. And they can't figure out how to use it in their system because the back end doesn't know what to do with it because it's not a prescription. We would be in the Kaiser system right now, saving them a lot of money and a lot of people headaches from a lot of very toxic other solutions that they're doing. But because we're not a prescription, they can't figure out what to do. And if we were a prescription, we could cross, countries too. And so that's part of the reason why we're going down the pathway. We won't change the products, but we will change how they're defined in the system. It's a tough thing, find somebody that knows what they're doing and grow your own.
Yeah, well, that's quite a labor intensive or somewhat labor intensive. All right, so if folks want to order, they can go to entourage.com and we can potentially get some of our doctors here or other clinicians who might want to get official with you so that they could be able to offer it to their clients could get it through them.
Chris would love to talk to anybody who wants to, if anybody wants to utilize our formulations, Chris would love to talk to you and get you all set up and get you affiliate codes and stuff like that. So.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll correspond with Chris and I've already popped it in the chat. The website is entourage.com. But perhaps we can be more streamlined because if not everything is visible on the website unless you have clinician access.
It is, and I apologize for that too. And because we're making this shift in business, we've had to even tone the Entourage website down further. And if you hear about somebody doing very similar things, there's a company called Front Range Pharmaceuticals that's doing very similar stuff because that is who we are going down the FDA pathway.
Okay.
We have to change our name. And I love the Entourage name. Entourage, by the way, it's ENDOURAGE, and our age. And it's the endocannabinoid system and the entourage effect of the cannabis plant. And I just thought it was brilliant. So just one letter we had to change. And now we have to change the name. Anyway, thanks for listening.
Love that too. All right, my friends. So we have 4 minutes left. Are there any other questions I see that some of the people who are in my private apprenticeship want some more information, more strain specific. So we might have to have Michael come back and be even more nerdy with
I'm
us.
happy to have a conversation, just, a question and answer. I mean, I'll answer the question. The only thing I won't tell you is the proprietary stuff,
Yeah,
because it's not mine to give out. So,
got it.
but otherwise, I don't really agree with keeping things secret, share it.
Well, we appreciate that. So Rebecca has her hand up. Rebecca, do you want to ask your question in our last couple of seconds, minutes?
Yeah, hopefully it's quick. I just was curious, you mentioned how the using the products boosts those receptors, but what happens if you've used the plant in the past and then you haven't in many, many years? Do those receptors like disappear or just go dormant or what?
Yeah, the receptors are a pretty dynamic part. They're expressed on the surface of the cell, or they are recycled back into the interior of the cell based on the environment. And so, when you first come across the products, you increase the number of receptors. If you're utilizing it on a daily basis, then you will decrease them. And if you go through periods of time where you use a lot of cannabis, say that you're having either increased anxieties, and so you're going to increase your dose for a while, or you have increased inflammatory issues and you increase your dose for a while, the receptors will kind of downregulate and it won't be quite as effective. And then stop again about 72 hours, and your receptors will then repopulate. So there are all sorts of ways that you can resensitize yourself to cannabis, and there are all sorts of ways to desensitize yourself to certain aspects of it. So, for example, if you're using a very high THC chemovar for pain control, and you want to stay on that, there are ways that we can make that effective and make the attenuate the euphoria that you experience with it. So the receptors are dynamic. And
All right. Kelly, your hand is up. Good to see you.
Sorry, I'd love to know, and I know it might be kind of hard to answer, but if you had something that could work well for like a preteen, I know it's a minor where it could help regulate their system who's dealing with responses to trauma, kind of anxiety and issues with sleep, digestion, and all of those kinds of things.
so we work with a doc actually in not the one was he San, no, he's San Antonio. And he has a very large pediatric population, and we will be bringing one of our formulations actually through that for ADHD. ADHD is a little bit different than anxiety issues, although we'll, use the same actives, they'll be in a little different distribution. In general, for kids, our formula AX is one that I use fairly frequently in kids, especially kids with seizure disorders. Sometimes, if we're looking at the ADHD kind of stuff, in a similar way in which that like caffeine can help with ADHD, sometimes the formulations that are kind of activating, like formula ME would be one of those. Our formula CLR work well for ADHD. We're learning more in the pediatric area as we're getting them, into the practice. I stand behind my products in the pediatric market, and I can talk to any practitioner in depth about that and why. I do not have studies in pediatrics, however.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're at the top of the hour. Michael, I'm so grateful to you. And sounds like we're going to have more questions and more emails coming your way and probably bringing you back. But I can definitely see that most people have reported in really positive responses and real gratitude. The last question was about PTSD. Is there a specific formulation as we're just wrapping up here?
In general, I go with the more calming of them unless there's something else going along with it. So, the post-traumatic stress, usually anxiety is a big issue with it, as opposed to kind of these some people, when they respond to the stress, it's more of a psychomotor retardation, but PTS is more like people are activated and they're agitated, and so I bring them down a little bit.
Okay. Well, I'm going to connect with you and learn more about some of these formulations, because since I'm a licensed physician in the United States, I might be able to help some of our community out. So thank you all for tuning in. You will get the replay. So if this went too fast, you can dive in and watch it again. And I invite you to join us for some of the other talks. In 1 hour from now, we will be back on this Zoom link with Jessica Lagarde, Renee Ava, Elsa, and myself to explore psilocybin retreats and sound healing. So join us for that. And then in April, we're doing a talk on ayahuasca with Chen Lizra and the Mazatec tradition of psilocybin mushrooms with Sergio Rodriguez Castillo. So you will get replays for everything. If you have questions, send me an email. And for those of you who want to connect with Michael, just let me know and I will make it happen. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you again, Michael, and speak to you again soon.